Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from the different corners of the globe. Thank you so much for connecting and spending the next hour with us. We have a really interesting institution and two remarkable individuals that we're going to have a really interesting discussion about the nexus between diplomatic training, the practice of diplomacy within the context of multilateral diplomacy. And if I may, let me quickly ask our panelists. So the Honorable Dr. Kees Rader, if I can please ask you to very quickly for our online audience, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, good evening to all of you. Pleasure to participate. Thank you, UNITAR, for organizing this, and Jan Hans, you especially. It's a pleasure to be discussing this under your able leadership. My name is Kees Rader, and up to 2 years ago, I was a Dutch diplomat. I worked for the Dutch MFA for over 40 years. And I served on all the continents, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and of course, Europe and the UN in New York. And now I'm working on a number of projects, including very much so Diplomats Without Borders.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Rader. And now I would kindly ask the Honorable Dr. Karel de Beer to please briefly introduce himself.
Yes, thank you very much, John Hans. And good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you. My name is Karel de Beer, and I'm a bit repetitive because I have followed more or less the same career as my colleague Kees Rader, with one slight difference that I also spent some time in leading our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which gave me an overview and responsibility for all our embassies and consulates abroad. And in the last 10 years, I spent 10 years of my life, 12 years of my life in training all over the world, from Abu Dhabi to New York, and then from Norway to Africa. So I have both a diplomatic and a training background.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both Karl and Kees for your brief introductions. Just a quick overview of some of our participants who've connected. We actually have some serving diplomats. We also have a number of UN colleagues that are based in different missions. A very warm welcome to you. Kees, if I can loop back to you, please tell us what is Diplomats Without Borders? What is the origin of this magnificent organization? But also tell us in a bit about your mission and what are your strategic goals during the next 3 to 5 years, please?
Yeah. No, thanks for this opportunity to tell a bit more about Diplomats Without Borders, because I could imagine that quite a few in the audience have never heard of it, since we are I think for an organization, we are extremely young. We are slowly getting from the baby to the young age, let's say. If I look at historically speaking, where we come from, I think I would have probably to go back more than half a century ago. And don't worry, I won't be too long. But a bit more than half a century ago, there were a bit more than 10 doctors in Paris who met. And they were discussing their profession, and who basically came to the conclusion that out of their ethical obligations, they felt that they really should basically try to provide medical assistance to those on the planet who need it most. And of course, I'm talking about the origin and the beginning of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, which I found when I read an article about them an extremely inspiring example of a profession that is not just having an easy life and doing what everybody does, but who felt that they had really a vocation, a mission in life to try to make our planet a better place. Anyway, then I started discussing this with a few colleagues, and we found out that first we found out that there are quite a few professions who have a similar organization. You name it, from carpenters without borders, to architects without borders, to nurses without borders, to journalists without borders. And of course, these organizations are extremely different in the setup and so on. But basically, they share this same philosophy, that they feel that they know something, they have knowledge about a specific sector, about a specific profession, and they want to share that with those most in need of these services. And coming back to Doctors Without Borders, again, that was 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. And today they are this fantastic organization with more than 40,000 people, with a huge budget. And rightly so, I think they received the Nobel Peace Prize for what they are doing, because again, I think they're one of the most admired organizations in the world. Anyway, discussing this further, we also discovered that there was no such thing as Diplomats Without Borders. And of course, we realized that as long as, take my example, as long as I'm working for the MFA and my authorities are my government in the Netherlands, it's a bit difficult to be active on the kind of issues that I'm dealing with in my work, be it conflict, be it training, be it diplomacy. And at the same time, touch on similar issues, let's say from an NGO perspective. But then, of course, if you are a former diplomat, the whole story changes. And whether you're former because you retired, or whether you're former because you chose to follow a different professional path, your hands are free. And we realized that there are so many former diplomats who have worked in diplomacy for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and who have gained all this experience in diplomacy, who have gained experience in specific regions of the world or on specific issues, and who basically from one day to the other, they're not being used anymore. So anyway, we thought that it really would be worth thinking about founding an organization like Diplomats Without Borders. We had a discussion with the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation found us interesting enough to facilitate a one-week conference in their training center in Bellagio, and it was in June 2 years ago, so June 22. And that allowed us to discuss, let's say, for a week with, I think we were a group of around 20 diplomats from 14 different countries, that allowed us to develop this concept further. And of course, what we immediately did was to try to focus our let's say, our mission, and to try to define where would our contribution be most valuable. And of course, the first issue that immediately came up was conflict, because unfortunately, the world knows more conflicts today than ever before. We have, I don't know, you might be familiar with the Uppsala conflict data program, which registers all kinds of conflicts in the world. And they told us that in 2023, there were 59 conflicts between states. 59, and that is the highest number since they started this data program in 1975. So just to say that there is an incredible amount of conflicts. And of course, we hear a lot about Ukraine, we hear a lot about Gaza, but there are many, many other conflicts that are also deadly, and it also cause, like, I think now we have more than 100 million refugees all over the world. And these are interstate conflicts, but of course, additionally, we have intrastate conflicts. I don't know, between a central government and a particular region of a country, or between ethnic groups. So in short, there is an incredible amount of conflicts in the world. And there we are with former diplomats who have experience in these conflicts. We are discussing for a moment in DWB about Myanmar, about Afghanistan, about Sudan, about Libya, to see if we could contribute something to bring our very little contribution to a, not perhaps even a solution, but to try to improve the situation, let's put it that way. So conflict was a first issue we wanted to focus on, because there are immense needs for conflict mediation and so on. And the second area was, to summarize, promoting diplomacy. Because unfortunately, and I'm sure as UNITAR, a member of the UN, you are very, very aware of that. I mean, there is a bit, I won't say a huge crisis, but there is a bit of tension in the multilateralism in the UN. And you see that more and more countries opt for a bilateral approach to problems rather than going for the multilateral way. And this is increasingly the case. Let's say that more and more sectors are being drawn into this geopolitical divide we see these days in this multipolar world with, of course, the US and China and Russia, European Union, India, and a number of other countries emerging as well. And there is more and more this approach of looking primarily at your bilateral interests above a more universal, a more multilateral approach. Just two quick examples from my own experience. I was a couple of years ago, I was the Arctic ambassador for the Netherlands, because historically speaking, we've been involved in that part of the world. And when you go to Arctic meetings, in my time, everybody would agree that this was an area of the world which is geographically so important for the whole planet that we should not touch it, and we should not let geopolitical differences, let's say, override this common approach. But if you look at Arctic cooperation these days, also there you see this increasing bilateral approach, which I think is, in the long run, extremely worrying. And the other example I want to give to illustrate what some people call the weaponization of universality and of interdependence is that you see that another sector where this geopolitical divide is more and more dominating the debates is trade. And as an example, in the Netherlands, we have ASML, which is a huge company which produces chip-making machinery. And they are more and more forbidden to trade with China because, well, the West doesn't want to share this extremely high-tech know-how with China. Again, understandable from a certain perspective, but if you look at it from a global perspective, this approach of more and more wanting to be self-sufficient instead of buying raw materials or buying products where they are being made most efficiently is, of course, not exactly increasing our wealth and is not going for the most effective economic solution. So also there you see, again, closing the shutters a little bit and going for a bilateral approach. Anyway, so as Diplomats Without Borders and as former diplomats who have functioned in this diplomatic world for quite a long time, and some of them, some of our members come from a UN background, have been ASG, USG, or special representative of the SG for a specific country. So we feel that really we should do whatever we can, and again, bring our very, very modest contribution to whatever can improve the belief in diplomacy and the belief in multilateralism and the belief in the UN system. We will have, of course, the Summit of the Future end of September, and we are, for example, now trying to formulate recommendations to that conference from our perspective. So these are two areas where in Bellagio we agreed we should focus on. And the third one, the third chapter is on training, but that's something that Karel de Beer will address in a second. And then two last comments, otherwise it will be too long. First of all, I think what makes us different from other or similar organizations is that we really want to have a global approach. As I was saying, you have all these poles in the world who approach more and more the international relations from their own ideological perspective and from their own interests. What we want to do is to really translate this multipolarity into a truly global thinking. That's why we're very happy we have quite a few members from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe, from the US, from the Americas. So we really hope to translate this diversity of our membership into a truly global approach in order to perhaps make the step to the new reality in the world, that there is no such thing as a Western way of approaching things or the Chinese way or whatever, but really to try to merge these into one vision of what we would need to improve this planet. And my last comment is that about our structure, to make clear that there are a number of very, very capable actors already out there on conflict mediation, on training, you name it. And we certainly do not have the ambition of becoming yet another organization doing that. Our only assets are our members. Our members who do not have to answer to an authority or to a nationality. They are totally, the only thing they bring is their experience, their networks, and their ambition to help things improve. And so we want, as DWB, as an organization, we want to be a platform between, on the one hand, our members, and on the other hand, the demand, be it for training, be it for conflict mediation, and so on. And I really want to stress that, because otherwise people might think, there you have yet another organization. No, we really want we want to be humble, and again, just be a platform linking up the expertise we have to the needs that are in the world. I think I'll leave it at that for the moment, Jan Hans.
Thank you so much, Kees. Allow me just to very succinctly try to highlight some of the important elements that you mentioned. One is Diplomats Without Borders is truly a treasure trove of human capital when it comes to individuals who have served in different forms and different diplomatic missions of either international institutions, their respective governments within the United Nations, and the human-centeredness of your aims, your objectives, to ensure that you are able to focus on both SDG 4, education, SDG 16, peaceful, the development of peaceful partnership and societies, and finally SDG 17, which is based on high-value collaborative partnerships without leaving anyone behind. So UNITAR would like to take its hat off to you for initiating, because when we look at the trajectory under your leadership, from 2 years ago, as you mentioned, you were invited by the Rockefeller Foundation, and you know, the territory in which you are involved in today. Congratulations. I would just like to again invite our online audience. Please feel free, as our panelists, Kees or Carl, discusses elements and it provokes a really interesting question that you would like to pose, please feel free to pop it in the chat. And when we're going to open the floor for questions, we would like then to draw on your questions. So thank you again, Kees. Carl, if I can please ask you to give us a bit of a deep dive now in terms of the training elements and objectives and strategies of Diplomats Without Borders, please.
Yes. Thank you, John Hans. It is a pleasure. First of all, I'm very happy to see in the attendees list that pops up once in a while on my screen that quite a number of young diplomats all over the world, from Argentina to Europe, are joining us today, and I'm very happy to talk to you. In itself, I think it's quite obvious that if you bring a group like us, the former diplomats, together, like we did in Bellagio and later, we are now around 80 or more people in Diplomats Without Borders, that training, transferring knowledge and experience will be one of the pillars of Diplomats Without Borders. We are people who have done it with our own hands for 40 years or more. So we have done all the different elements of diplomacy. If you look at our website, you see all these people, all these diplomats and specialists from all quarters of the world, male and female, and very happy to report, like Kees did, that with all people with different regional backgrounds and also bilateral and multilateral, the different aspects of diplomacy are there. And what do we want? We basically want to bridge the gap that still exists in the various elements that play a role in world political scene, in the diplomacy scene. That goes for bilateral, where we have to really level the level playing field, contribute to the leveling of the playing field, but also regional and multilateral work. So what we offer is like to assist in bringing skills. Like many professions, diplomacy is also a skill-related profession. You need diplomatic skills. So various ministries and organizations that require those skills to efficiently represent their organization or their country, we can assist. The same goes, by the way, for international NGOs that need some of these skills and requirements. Some of you, or hopefully all of you, know that it requires skills to negotiate in the UN. You think the UN is one big, easy beast. It is not. It is a complicated organization which has regional organizations, it has specialized organizations, and it really takes a while before you understand how it works, where it comes from, and where it goes, what has changes. But next to that, you have the European Union, you have the African Union, you have all kinds of organizations from NATO to all kinds of regional organizations that you need to understand, and you need to create an approach if you want to achieve the goals of your country, your organization, or a multilateral environment. And it's very important that you know these background rules and practices. And to be honest, sometimes that lacks in daily practice. You need to work hard to have a voice in a world where there's a tendency to be dominated by the big powers. But the smaller countries, the smaller organizations need to work harder. And we are there, hopefully, to contribute and making their work slightly more efficient. An important element is, of course, that diplomacy has changed in the 40 years that I've been working in, starting from the mid-70s. I can tell you things have changed. Not only the internet, but also the social media, artificial intelligence, but the whole way in that people are participating and have knowledge of diplomatic and political activities has changed dramatically. And I'm not going to go into details there, but I can tell you nice anecdotes about it. Just today, we are giving a course in international negotiations and conflict resolution in Bangladesh. Interesting, that is a course that we are giving both for the Bangladeshi younger diplomats, but also people from the region that have been invited by the Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What do we offer? What are the things that we do or could do? We give a lot of we have an opportunity to give a lot of courses from report writing and analysis. I mean, we are not journalists. If you are a diplomat, you are not a journalist. You're not there to describe the car accident. You are there to describe what and analyze what the results is, what the consequences are. Institutional knowledge. You have to know the UN. You have to know where it comes from. You have to know humanitarian background before you start to work. Multilateral negotiations is really an art in itself, whether it's the WTO or whether it's climate negotiations. It is really a skills-related job, and we can use a lot of simulations there. Leadership, including gender equality, team building, and communications. I mean, you can be a diplomat, but if you can't communicate, if you cannot explain to other people what you are doing, you're only halfway there. Humanitarian work, locally led, community level, peace building activities, cross-regional activities, and of course the conflict resolution, conflict analysis And that's that kind of thing that Kees already mentioned. For us, the collaboration with UNITAR is very good news, and I'm very happy that we have the opportunity here, and we are going to do more with UNITAR, because UNITAR has proven to be a very good and efficient platform with contacts all over the world. There's all kinds of people, and you are, let's say, the present day representation of them here at the webinar, with contacts all over the world, and we hope that we can add value, as I said, value to the work of UNITAR. We are the people who have done it. We have seen it, and who have worked, hopefully, in the direction of solutions. In the coming weeks and months, we have 5 more webinars, which will be focused on Diplomats Without Borders members, on conflict sensitivity and conflict transformation, on leadership, as I mentioned, as an important subject. Gender responsive protection is also a very important subject, and we have got 2 members who are very good and very specialized in the subject. And of course, humanitarian law, which is, let's say, so much underestimated nowadays. We all have attention for other things almost. And then the last one, not the least one, is the climate change as a threat to global security. So this is, in short, what we have to offer. We hope that we, through UNITAR and through your attendance and maybe your suggestions and requirements, we can indeed bridge that gap and create a level playing field, which I think is very much needed. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Carl. I would just like to, ladies and gentlemen, as the representative of UNITAR and specifically the Peace Division's Online Learning and Education Unit, just expand a little bit on some of the collaborative projects that we will be taking forward with Diplomats Without Borders. So in August, September, October, November, and December, we will have these different themed webinars that Carl just spoke about. We would also like to invite interest. So any one of you that would like to collaborate with both UNITAR and with Diplomats Without Borders, please feel free to pop a note in the chat box, and we'd be able to follow up if you have any specific training requirements that you would like us to look into. But more importantly, allow me just to pause for a couple of minutes, because we're also going to be integrating as experts some of the partner former diplomats that both Kees and Carl spoke about in the various master programs that we offer. So we have a master in conflict, peace and security in partnership with the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya in Spain. We are also looking at the integration of Diplomats Without Borders and our Master of Electoral Policy and Administration with the Scuola Superior Sant'Anna in Italy, our Master in Humanitarian Action and Peace Building. And I see that we have some of our current participants present here today. Please know you are very welcome, in collaboration with Oxford Brookes University. And then we are going to launch in September as a Master in Sustainability Leadership with the Technological University in Dublin. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is a wide range of activities that we're going to be collaborating with between UNITAR and Diplomats Without Border. But I think the one that I look forward to most is our second international conference that we will be hosting in Brussels on the 3rd and the 4th of December that would look at climate security. So again, just a quick overview of the different activities of this very rich and rewarding collaborative partnership between UNITAR and Diplomats Without Borders. I would like to, before I open the floor, just give the word again to Carl or Kees if there are any additional comments you wanted to make before we take questions from our audience.
Not really, but at your first question at the beginning of the session was about our ambitions for the coming, let's say, 1 or 2 years. Well, as Karel said, we have now more than 80 members out of more than 40 countries. And again, the fact that you're seeing 2 former Dutch diplomats might give the wrong impression. We only have 3 Dutch members, and the rest are all from other parts of the world. And so one ambition is to grow our membership. So if anybody is interested, then please drop us a line. Having said it, and I saw, I think, a question about whether serving diplomats can become a member. And that is unfortunately not possible because, as I said, you cannot work for 2 masters in the same field, being diplomacy. I mean, it's a bit difficult you might have a conflict of interest, just to say that is not possible. But if you are a former diplomat, please, you can always approach us. So that's one. And 2 is, and I have to mention it very briefly, is of course the funding issue. And we are really trying to find some funding, which so far has been rather difficult. But again, of course, we're just getting started. But I just wanted to mention that these are definitely issues we are, apart from our country-specific ambitions and our multilateral ambitions in terms of the Summit of the Future and the follow-up of that summit. I guess these are also the other priorities we are looking at for the 1-2 years to come. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kees. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me try and pick up some of the questions that we have. We had a question from somebody who serves with the UN, who wanted to know, is it possible for UN staff members to join Diplomats Without Borders?
Well, I think I answered that already by saying that if you are at present working for the UN, it's a bit difficult to combine with being a member of DWB. But if you are a former UN staff member, by all means, most welcome. So let's, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to put into context, because the practice of diplomacy and foreign relations is all about promoting the self-interest of the country or the institution that you represent. And we use self-interest in terms of the overseas development projects, etc., that is articulated then. And when you, as Kees was saying, when you hold full-time employment and working as a member of Diplomats Without Borders, asks a sense of neutrality and independence in your engagement, and you will compromise that contribution. So it's really important to understand that challenge. But if there are members present in the audience that of course are not connected to any UN organization or to any government institution, please do reach out to Ambassadors Without Borders. Then we have a question: how can Diplomats Without Borders contribute to influencing the resolution of conflict between Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah, taking into account the possibility of the escalation of a regional war in the Middle East?
Well, perhaps I can start, and Karel might want to add something, but I think a word that I should have used more often perhaps is the word humble. We have to be humble. We are just a starting organization, And especially on this conflict, there are already so many actors from from countries to regional organizations, international organizations, NGOs. And I know that there are quite some efforts going on that we hear about. There are definitely also efforts going on that we do not hear about, or only indirectly, to try to do something about this conflict. So I don't think it's realistic for us to think that we can have a prominent role in that conflict. Where we could contribute, because again, we have quite a few members who have been active in the region and who have still are very active in the networks they build up during their careers in that region. We could, of course, play a role, let's say, together with other actors above or below the radar, to try to bring this terrible conflict back to manageable proportions. Let's call it that way. And even more important, to look at the post-conflict area, because it's pretty obvious that a lot of work will have to be done to bring the population, because again, these are the main victims, of course, on all sides, to bring that to bring these at least a bit more understanding for each other, and or to make them even aware of the conditions that the other population lives in. And again, I know that there are quite some efforts to do that. And again, we certainly have a couple of members who would be probably very happy to help in these efforts. But again, as I was saying in the beginning, it's not DWB as an organization that will play a role here, but we are certainly very available to facilitate the participation of some of our members. And I know some members are very eager to step in, to assist in efforts to try to do something about this conflict. But Karel, you might want to add something.
No, just two practical examples. One of the things that we have done in the past, not particularly on this conflict, but also on this conflict, is do simulations and to show to participants how complicated conflicts are. Many conflicts, and I worked in the region, many conflicts are multi-layers. We have it's not a one-dimensional conflict. And that's one of the things that you have to learn as a diplomat, to analyze what the multi-layer elements of a conflict are before you start working on solutions. And what we have done in the past, I'm talking about we more in general, is training diplomats from both sides of the conflict, from Afghanistan to Iraq and all these other places. And where we, of course, I have trained, for instance, quite a number of them, both in Riyadh, Gulf Cooperation Council, and also in Abu Dhabi, but to make them aware and to teach them about how to be effective in international fora, how you can bring your own cause to the international fora, which is a skill in itself.
Thank you very much, Kees and Carl. Allow me just also to answer on behalf of UNITAR, and I would just like again to share the statements of the Secretary General of the United Nations, where he said the only solution to the conflict is a peaceful diplomatic solution. And why, ladies and gentlemen, both UNITAR and Diplomats Without Borders cannot stress the importance of us understanding the multitude of tools, capacities, attitudes, cultures, and platforms that exist to ensure the effective deployment of result-based diplomacy. In this multipolar world in which we live, where we have populism, the positive and the negative impacts, globalization, both the positive and the negative, and also the predatory elements of economic development, as Kees had mentioned in some of his opening remarks, the weaponization of business, trade, and economic policies. So it's really important that we we come back to the very essence, which was captured in the Vienna Convention of 1961, about member states are equal and that they are international rules-based system in which countries who form part of this global nation of states practice diplomacy on an equal basis. So really it is important, because life is sacred, and diplomacy tries to help us to celebrate life rather than having to regret the loss of life. We have another question, and this one is, I'm wondering what makes a diplomat? How do you become one? And what are the official and unofficial entities that make a diplomat a truly successful diplomat? Kees, if I can ask you to, or Carl.
I think Karel, because he's teaching this, so I think he's the perfect person to answer.
Yeah. And first of all, thanks to John Hans, because he already mentioned the Vienna Convention. And you're not a diplomat if you call yourself a diplomat. You're a diplomat if you are being sent by a country to another institution, to another country, and you're being accepted by the other country. And that's all being ruled by the Vienna Convention. And of course, then you have the multilateral diplomacy. That's a different subject, which is also guided by a number of rules. So the next question is, when you become an effective diplomat. I think that's the question. Well, in my teachings, there are only the 3 priorities: network, network, network. How to build up a network? How do you build up a network in 6 months' time, so to speak, to be effective in 4 years? How do you build up a network in New York? How do you build up a network in Chad or in Mauritania? So these are things you can learn by just calling yourself a diplomat, and by going to a region, you're not effective yet. And then you have also to be effective within the organization that you work. Integral diplomacy. If you're working as a diplomat in the political department, you have people in the economic department, you have people in the defense department, you have people in the scientific department. You have to be working together to make an effective group of people under the guidance of an ambassador. So it's a whole story, so to speak. And nowadays, sometimes people call themselves ambassadors and diplomats, but it is truly a profession.
Thank you very much, Karel.
If you allow me to add one dimension, which, first of all, I don't think there is a diplomat, there is a mold which is true for all countries in the world. Of course, there are differences between diplomats from Europe or from Latin America or from Asia that are linked to the local culture. I will never forget when I was ambassador in Brazil, that was the time that Twitter came up. And we were actively encouraged by our ministry to be on Twitter, to share as much as possible what we were doing every day, you know, also to inform our taxpayers and also to gather support for our points of view and so on. But I remember when I was sharing that with some Latino colleagues, they really looked at me, what, are you on Twitter? They found it totally not appropriate that as a diplomat you would be on Twitter. So just to say that there are differences in culture, but at the and again, Jan Hans, you said that of course a diplomat is representing the interest of his or her country. Obviously, yes, but I think ultimately, and again, I'm coming back to DWB now. Ultimately, I think that every diplomat really finds it very important to always keep communicating with diplomats from other countries. That even if you have conflicts with another country, even if you have differences of opinion, or perhaps even if you are at war with each other, but if diplomats do not talk with each other anymore, that's basically the end of it. So we really, really have to cherish and keep channels open as diplomats, because again, and it doesn't have to be formal, it can be informal or under the radar, but as diplomats should, I think, always continue communicating with each other, because that's the last resort solution to solve conflicts.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carl, and thank you, Kees. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another 10 minutes or so. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat box so that we can enrich the exchange with you as much as possible. We had a question from one of the participants. I think it was the last question. To what extent does business play a role in economic diplomacy?
Karel, you want to start, or shall I?
Well, it's easy to start. Business plays an important role because when countries have good relations, and diplomats are there to facilitate good relations, economic relations are an integral part of it. But not only that, it's also nowadays tax, investment arrangement. So business is not something just to, let's say, to ship goods. It is a more complicated area. And I mentioned when I was talking just now, the World Trade Organization. I can also mention the European Union. I can mention the Asian Development Bank as 3 institutions. You have to learn how everything, also business and economic promotion, fits into those overall rules and regulations. And diplomats are there to guide and to make sure that there are no problems. And if there are problems, we are paid to solve them.
Yeah, I would say that promoting the economic interests of the private sector of the country you are a diplomat, you are representing, is one of the core parts of our work. Of course, depending on where you are posted, and in some countries, trade relations or investment relations are not that important. But in other countries, it is at the center of attention of what, as a diplomat, you have to do. We organize, and every country does that, a lot of trade missions, where there is a marriage of diplomacy and economic interests. And there we try to link up our private sector with the private sector of the other country and with the authorities, because of course there are quite a few countries where the public sector plays an extremely important role in terms of economic relations, economic interests, in terms of investment protection and so on, and trade barriers. And again, this is really at the core of the missions of diplomats. And of course, it works both ways. So we are promoting the interests of our private sector. And of course, the private sector is also thinking with us about what kind of foreign policy we should have, of course, looking at it from their perspective. So if the question is, do they participate in the foreign policy formulation of a country? The answer is yes. But at the same time, of course, realizing that as a public sector, yes, you have to defend the economic interests of your private sector, but you also have other obligations. I'm talking about human rights, I'm talking about political relations and so on. And of course, it's up to the diplomacy to merge these different interests, I guess.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to take the last 2 questions and I'm going to combine it in one, because it basically asks us to comment on what are the rules-based system when it comes to managing armed conflict. And I just quickly read the questions. So the first one, is it possible to formulate some rules to let us know and measure the impact of armed conflict? And the second one is, I would like to know what are the most common challenges when negotiating peace in multilateral forums dominated by greater powers, and what strategies does Diplomats Without Borders use in order to reach agreements for sustainable peace?
If I quickly kick off, well, first, I think these are issues that will be very central in the upcoming webinars. where we talk about the conflict. I think that's the next one. We have one on humanitarian law, which of course is also very, very central in the answer to these questions. So I think that if you're interested in these issues, you'd certainly follow these webinars or participate in these webinars. But yes, of course, there are rules for conflicts. The UN Charter, for one, or all the conventions, treaties we have all signed up to. But unfortunately, you see that, well, it's not so that everybody always respects these documents we have all signed and ratified. But to take one example, the International Court of Justice, as you know, recently gave an opinion on the actions of Israel in Gaza. Well, the fact that the ICJ issues such a ruling does not automatically mean that so this is now done and everybody will respect the ruling. I mean, it's much, much more complicated, of course, and ultimately it is very difficult to force a country to accept a ruling. We should not focus only on the cases where this is not the case, because there are many examples where the ICJ rulings are accepted by both parties, and by that way avoiding an active conflict. So there are also many, many positive examples. But unfortunately, it's not always the case. And of course, we as Netherlands hosting all the many of the international courts, ICC, ICJ, and so on, we are particularly attached to respect for these rulings. So in that sense, we think it is very, very important to uphold all these kind of rulings. And last comment is that we also feel that the UN documents, the Charter, already give quite some possibilities to the UN as such to act. And we feel, and again, this is something that will be discussed, I think, at the Summit of the Future, we feel that perhaps the UN could even more actively than they're doing at present, make use of some articles of the Charter and of other legal instruments to try to play a more active role in a number of conflicts. So we shouldn't be too shy, and we should perhaps act with even more commitment to try to solve issues within the limits of what is reasonable. You don't want to lose touch with reality, obviously, but I mean, it's a very thin margin where perhaps slightly more could be done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kees. Karel, some last words from you on this question?
Yes, and I'll go down again to the practical level. Somebody asked us what are the DWB ideas. We don't have our own policy. We are not here yet to solve all problems in the world. What we can do is to assist, basically, again, in the tools. And one of the things that very much will be subject later on in one of the webinars about conflict resolution is really to make sure that the participants also in the international negotiations know the different layers of the conflict, and the different layers of the conflict and different elements of the conflict also determine what are effective players in the possible solutions. And you'll be surprised sometimes that we are focusing too much on the well-known, but also use, let's say, non-governmental and other institutions to solve conflict. There's a huge tendency, that is one of the elements in the courses that we do about conflict and about negotiation. We have a huge tendency to concentrate on our own positions, while in diplomacy, your first obligation is to understand the other one. Please understand the people on the other side of the table before you formulate your own policy, so to speak. And that is a general, I mean, most of the people that are listening in might say, well, that's obvious, but in practice, it is not so obvious. People have really the tendency to focus on exactly what they're doing for their own government instead of learning how other people are formulating their positions, and then adjust and see how you can really play in to the positions of others.
Thank you so much, Carl and Kees. And ladies and gentlemen, our honorable guests just gave a truly remarkable answer of the quality of this collaborative partnerships, because Kees very clearly said it's in not once did any one of them try to give a handbook or to say, here's the solution. They were saying, you need to get the information, you need to identify what are the challenges, and then you need to sit down and you need to have discussions with the different actors. And Carl said, you know, it needs to go down to the ground level. It has to be action result-based approach. It has to be practical. So for both of you, I thank you so much. And as Carl mentioned, there are going to be some webinars, and we've just shared with you the upcoming webinars. So the one that we're going to have in August, that's going to look at conflict sensitivity. Then we're going to look in September at how leadership in complexity, and again the role of diplomatic practice and diplomatic intervention comes to play. October, a very important one, gender responsive protection, where the local community has ownership, and the one in November, and that's a really important one, where we're going to be talking about humanitarian law and the law of war, notably the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the additional protocols of 1977. And then the final one is to look at climate change and climate security related matters. Ladies and gentlemen, a most sincere thank you on behalf of UNITAR, the Division for Peace, and the Honorable Dr. Kees Rader and the Honorable Dr. Karel de Beer from the Diplomats Without Borders. Thank you so much for joining us, and we certainly look forward to welcoming you and engaging with you in our future webinars. And please, if you have any questions, please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to respond to you. Thank you so much.